course, the chairman moved to a new house. Already been decided.
No, that's funny.
The public hearing of September 13th, 2022 will now please come to order at 7:01 p.m. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Broussard.
Present.
Ms. Gilchrist.
Here.
Mr. Glassford.
Here.
Ms. Heeman.
Here.
She's here.
Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mr. Lippert.
Present.
Mr. Scarl.
Present.
Ms. Williamson.
Here.
And will the clerk please read the issue before council this evening?
Ordinance 2022-71, an ordinance amending the definition of quote apartment end quote in section 1115.02 of the Planning and Zoning Code of the Codified Ordinances of the City of North Olmsted entitled quote definitions A through B end quote for the purpose of updating definitions associated with multiple residence district uses.
Thank you. As a reminder to council, this is a public hearing. You're here to listen to the public comments. You may ask questions and follow up to the audience comments, but there will be a committee meeting at the conclusion of this public hearing for more in-depth questioning. Would Director of Economic and Community Development Upton please give council and the audience a brief description of the issue at hand?
Thank you, Mr. President. The definition that you have before you is to really bring our definition of apartment into more in line with where the market is with respect to how apartment buildings are built, generally speaking. If you read the old definition, it quite literally boxes us into one apartment typology, and that is the one that's your traditional stacked garden-style apartments where you come in one entrance and exit the other entrance. It has a common hallway with staircases and leading to entry doors into dwelling units. The new definition of apartment allows for townhome-style apartments, row-style apartments, and many others that are more in line with where the rental market is right now. It's just simply bringing us where if someone was interested in developing a townhome-style apartment building at this point in time, they have no ability to do so whatsoever because our code doesn't recognize that as an apartment.
Thank you. If there's anyone in the audience who'd like to address council on Ordinance 2022-71 only, please approach the podium and state your name and complete address for the clerk. If you live in a city other than North Olmsted, please state the name of that city and proceed with your comments. You will have up to 5 minutes. Okay, seeing no questions, with the agenda being completed and there being no further business to come before council, this public hearing, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't hear your hand being raised.
I know, sorry, my voice is a little weak today. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to just let council know that this was heavily discussed at the Planning Commission, the meeting at the planning level. And the reason that, this is important to the city is that this is becoming a housing trend, obviously, that many other suburbs are benefiting from and enjoying that we don't currently offer as, a type of housing. And we're, the real estate trend, as the expert pointed out at that meeting, is moving into that, folks just don't want to live in a 2 or 3 story kind of high rise to share a hallway. It's more hotelish looking rather than home-like feeling, and that was the importance and the value that this new definition brings to us as a community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from council? Okay. Seeing none, with the agenda being completed and there being no further business to come before council, this public hearing of September 13th, 2022 is adjourned at 7:06 p.m.
thought environmental, like, I had on the agenda, did they change it?
Building
No,
zoning
it's
first.
7:05.
At 7:05.
Okay, I had environmental from last week, that's fine. Okay. I'd like to start the Building Zoning Development Committee meeting at 7:05. Present committee members Limpert, Williamson, Heeman, the rest of council, the mayor, the assistant law director, the economic development director, safety director, human resources director, and guests. On the agenda, resolution 2022-71, 2022-72, and 2022-73, as well as 2022-68. We'll start with 2022-68, Fix Our Storefronts, which was previously held in committee, and Mr. Upton, you want to take that? Go ahead, Mr. Upton.
Should have probably sat on this side of the room for the first half of the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before you tonight, the clerk has circulated amended Exhibits A and C. At this point in time, given feedback that we received from the public, we would like to amend by substitution a new Exhibit A and C. And to kind of further clarify what those amendments are, I'll kind of walk through them real quick. In Exhibit A, there's slight textual changes in program eligibility guidelines to include nonprofit organizations that operate out of a storefront. And then item number 6 in the eligibility guidelines further clarifies the job creation component held within the grant itself. Mr. Chairman, do you want me to walk through all of the changes, or?
Yeah, if you could just go through all the changes first, then we could address it.
Okay,
detail
and then
after.
the changes in the grant contract itself, again, further clarifies the job creation component, namely that you create one new full-time equivalent job for each $10,000 awarded in grant funding. So if you're awarded the maximum signage grant of $5,000, that would be equivalent to adding a part-time position or a position equal to 1,040 hours. And we get that number by taking 40 hours a week times 52 weeks a year. 2080 hours is defined as full-time equivalent. So with that, take any questions from any members of council or committee.
Yeah, I just, if you could remind us how we verify the job creation.
There is an exhibit at the back of the contract document that requires quarterly reporting on payroll and sales. Employment, payroll, and sales are data points that we are taking quarterly as a result of the recipient receiving these funds. When they agree within the document to submit those reports or subject to recapture for not following through with the requirements of the grant program.
Okay. Any questions from committee? Questions from council? Ms. Gilchrist, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do have a question on, so the dollar amount that you guys have set forth, once you have given enough grants out, will this like replenish itself, or is it gonna have an end date, or how's that gonna work?
At this point in time, the program will sunset when the funds have been expended.
Okay.
Because it is ARPA funding, there's a relatively complex underwriting associated with creating a revolving loan fund for business purposes. For the home repair program that's also funded by ARPA, the regulations are much more lenient. Primarily, you can assume, the regulations say that you can assume that someone who is at or below 300% of the federal poverty guidelines has been adversely impacted by COVID. and such that if you create a revolving loan fund, so long as it continues to be for that purpose, it can revolve. On the business side, the regulations require that you define and underwrite the pandemic affected amount of a loan and then calculate that out. It gets into a much more minutia underwriting, and so that's why we made a decision to go with the grant program for this particular funding. You will notice, though, that in order to be eligible for the funding, you have to have all of your sources identified. So if you have a $100,000 project, you have to say, here's where all my money's coming from. And further, it is reimbursable. So once you complete the project, you apply for reimbursement. It's not money that comes out front.
Okay. Thank you.
Ms. Williamson?
I have one. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, what are the penalties for falsification on this, aside from litigation? I mean, is there any kind of monetary penalty involved with?
Are you talking, is there like, I would defer to law if there's any extraneous penalties by falsifying a document to obtain government benefits, but contained within the document itself is recapture of the principal amount of the grant award.
Would that be with interest tacked on, or?
I would pursue the maximum allowable fine, including interest and penalties allowed by law, and would lean on legal counsel for that.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Malley, do you have any comments?
Mr. Chair, oftentimes application form like this will have a warning provision as to falsification. I'm looking for that, but I don't see it. And a grant procedure like this would oftentimes have a penalty of recovery of the funds. And I would expect to have that remedy even if it's not outlined here.
Director, would that be something added in? Director O'Malley? Still
I
on
don't
record.
think that would have to be.
Okay. Thank you. I'm good.
Okay, at this time, I'd like to make a motion to recommend 2020,
Excuse me, Mr. Limpert, I'd
Oh,
love
yeah.
to hear what Mr. Burns,
Mr.
I
Burns,
guess,
you
in
said
the
you have a
audience
comment? Go ahead.
would like to share with us.
Jim Burns, 3978 Dover Center Road. It's, from what I just heard, it's my understanding that the guidelines will now permit nonprofits. And you've also built into the grant the requirement for one employee per certain amount of grant money.
Correct.
Okay. Now, questions. I raised a question about the aggregate limit of 250,000. Where do I find that limit being stated? As the ordinance reads now, the entire $1.6 million is available.
Mr. Burns. Mr. Burns, in your email that you had sent to my office dated August 29th, where you identified some concerns that you had with the legislation, we reviewed those concerns with legal counsel, also the finance director. The funds have already been appropriated via resolution authorizing the expenditure for certain programs related to the American Rescue Plan, which was part of the first tranche of funding. That resolution, I believe, was adopted in June of this year. So the appropriation had already happened. With respect to your question regarding the maximum allowable limits, the exhibits contained within the ordinance itself lay out exactly the program frameworks.
I did not see that in the exhibits.
If you look in the application and eligibility guidelines, they're clearly stated in the exhibits.
Well, I did, but I didn't see it. That's why I was asking.
Each one, so if you look
Section 4K.
4K.
Might be attachment or Exhibit C, Mr. Burns.
Yeah.
Exhibit C?
Yeah, there's an Exhibit B and an Exhibit C, they're all stapled together.
Mr. Chair?
So there's A, B, and C, so it would be the
Exhibit
Exhibit B, which is the application, where it's all the blank documents you sign and you identify program sources. There's the Fix Our Fronts facade comprehensive renovation that says that you can get up to $20,000. The lesser of $20,000 or 75% of the total project costs. The Fix Our Fronts signage, you can get up to $5,000 or 75% of the project costs, whatever is lesser.
Bear with me a minute. I don't see it on that one. Requirements. Okay. Okay, I didn't see that on the original, but that's okay. Okay. And for clarification, everything in the ordinance mentions ARPA grant money, but it doesn't, but the fund has a different name. And I just wondered why,
Because that was the requirement of the feds when we, Treasury, when they called it that, they said, call it this, local fiscal recovery fund, so.
yeah, but my point is, because somewhere down the road, somebody may bring it up as a legal question. In the ordinance, the actual name of the fund should be used somewhere to say that that's the source of the money, not ARPA grant money. You know what I'm saying?
I do, but, I don't think that that's necessary, because I think
Okay.
we've discussed it over and over again, where the funds are coming from, and we know that the local fiscal recovery fund is exactly ARPA monies. It was demanded by the regs to call it that, so I think that it's all interrelated. We file reports with the US Treasury on an annual basis, and
No,
that's how it's
I
linked.
understand that, but I always thought the legal requirement in Ohio was you had to use the actual name of the fund.
Mr. Chair, clearly, I think a financial, not a legal issue. And it sounds like the finance department has sorted that out.
Yeah, and just for clarification, what's the name of the fund again?
Local fiscal recovery.
Which is mentioned in Appendix C. Discussed both. You called it out in Exhibit C, the name of that, in addition to ARPA, so.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, does Mr. Burns have any further concerns he'd like to express?
One more.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Item 4 in the program eligibility guidelines asks the applicant business must be up to date in all real estate, personal income taxes. What are personal income taxes? The individual owners of the business having to pay their taxes, or all the employees having to file their tax returns? The reason I say it like that is because maybe what should be here is withholding taxes instead of personal income taxes.
Ms. Knopfer, any thoughts?
I didn't write this application, so I'm,
It is intended that the application asks for anyone with more than a 20% stake in the business to submit all of those documents. So the application is asking for anyone who has got a 20% stake or greater in the business to not be delinquent on personal, business, income, and real estate taxes. That is generally what the acceptable vetting is for a program like this.
Okay, I understand what you just said about 20% or more owner, but this thing says a requirement in order to apply, everybody has to have their personal income taxes filed. if you don't, I understand it's,
Correct, but there are people that still don't file their income taxes, so it is a threshold requirement of the program.
so if a 5% owner hasn't filed his income tax.
We're only interested in the information for folks that have a 20% stake in the business or greater. That's all that we ask for in the application itself. So if a 5% owner is not required to have that information, it's anyone that's got a 20% stake or greater.
So then the guidelines are not cast in stone, so you can go outside the guidelines and still apply for the grant.
Mr. Chairman,
No.
I think what the director is trying to explain in response to the question is that the eligibility guidelines are just that, guidelines, and that more specific detailed explanation of those guidelines is contained in the application form.
Well, all I'm saying, somebody might pick up the guidelines and be looking at that, and based solely on the guidelines, not want to apply for the grant, not even grab a grant application to see what's in the application.
So, thank you, Mr. Burns. Mr. Upton and Mr. O'Malley, so we're amending tonight the program eligibility guidelines in Exhibit A, right? The application, the application is what? It's not in Exhibit C, that's just, document the program. Where's the
Mr. Chairman, the application is Exhibit B from the original 2268 ordinance. There's no amendment being asked in Exhibit B.
So what is our, so what is our ability to update Exhibit B? Is that gonna have to come before council again?
I don't believe that Exhibit B is lacking in any way, shape, or form.
No, I understand that, I'm just asking.
If that particular exhibit needed to be amended, I would defer to Mr. O'Malley. I believe that there is language within the body of the enabling ordinance that allows for amendments so long as it is not detrimental to the city and approved to legal form by the law director's office.
So it's amendable without coming back to council for the application guidelines?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Burns.
Okay, I just noticed something. In my packet, Exhibit C is the grant agreement. In your packet, the one I just saw, and the one where you were showing me where everything is, Exhibit C is a grant application. So are we amending the ordinance to include the application instead of the agreement?
Mr. Burns, the original legislation had 3 exhibits, A, B, and C. So we're only amending 2 of the 3 exhibits by substitution. The original exhibit is not being amended. The original Exhibit B is not being amended whatsoever. So,
Okay.
no, we're not substituting a contract for an application.
Okay, then I apologize because I was not provided Exhibit B with the original ordinance that I was provided with.
Okay. Yeah, I see in Exhibit B, as long as we can amend the application form without having to come before council, I'm comfortable with that answer. Any other questions from council? Mr. Glassburn?
Mr. Chair, I just wanted, I know this is tedious, but this is a new program. I thank Mr. Burns for his time, and I thank council and administration for their patience as we establish this new program. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you, because I don't want to have to come back every time there's a slight change to the program and have to pass an amendment. So, thank you for clarifying that, Mr. O'Malley. And at this time, if there's no other questions, I'd like to make a motion to recommend 2022-68 as amendment, as amended with substitution as the noted line items, and ask for a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 3-0. Next on the agenda is 2022-71, which is an ordinance amending the definition of apartment, section 1115.02 of the Planning and Zoning Code and the codified ordinances of the City of North Olmsted entitled Definitions A, B, for the purpose of updating definitions associated with multiple resident district uses. Mr. Upton, we are all here at the public hearing. Is there any other items you want to update regarding that?
Mr. Chairman, not unless there's any questions of members of council.
The only question I had is how does this impact, how would this impact any current buildings that we have based on the change of definition? And that would include, if I'm understanding it right, you're saying that the updated definition of apartment would also now include townhouses?
Correct.
Okay. So how does that-
The short answer is there is no impact on buildings that exist. The old definition is still incorporated into the new definition. And even if it did alter them, there is a principle pre-existing non-conforming, or what people call grandfathered status. Since they existed prior to the amendment, they would have what's commonly referred to as grandfathered status.
But if they wanted to come before building and zoning?
They
to
could
make
still, if
changes-
someone still wanted to build a garden-style apartment building inside the city, they would still be able to. That's, the walk-up, stacked with the common entrance and exit. This just allows for more typologies of apartments. It doesn't outlaw what was there before.
And it wouldn't change the material requirements of a current, like, townhouse based on the refined definition?
No, actually, our zoning code does not even define townhouse at this point in time, individually speaking. It was a discussion I had with Director Garreau, and this is the way in which he advised we move this particular definition forward.
Okay. Any questions from committee? Questions from council? Mr. Glassburn?
Again, I apologize if I'm being tedious here. In a layman's terms, what this allows is for townhouse-style apartments.
This allows.
That currently are not allowed.
Yes, in the layman's terms, we took this definition and played with it a little bit. This is actually the same type of definition that Westlake has for their apartment code. You see a lot of apartments now that have their own garage and their own walk-up front door, that sort of thing. That's the trend, right? And if someone wanted to build that type of apartment building right now, they can't, because our code doesn't define it that way. So in the layman's terms, that is what we're moving towards, and away from what people, the apartments on Brook Park Road, for example, where there's garages that are shared, hallways that are shared. This is just a more modern style of apartment.
Great, thank you very much.
So Mr., I just got one other question. So what would, like, the Cinnamon Woods, or, like, what would those be considered then, those homes? Because to me, those are townhouses.
No.
Mr. Chair, those are condominiums.
Those are considered condominiums?
They
No.
are condominiums. They are
Mr.
owned-
Chair.
They are owned by individuals.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, go ahead, Ms.
I live in that type of housing that you're trying to refer to here, and they're not condominiums at all, really. They are individually parceled residences, even if it's a triplex building or a duplex. It's a completely different structure. There's not a rider on your mortgage for a condominium. There's not a rider on your insurance for a condominium. That's an entirely different type of ownership, not type of building. So condominium is relative to an ownership style rather than a building style. The building style that is more defined by this is, so for example, however they became built, I'm sure very painfully, the enclaves off of Kennedy Ridge Road, where, you've got your own little garage, you have your own little front entrance. This is now being, broadly put into our code as what the new definition will include. So that's the only difference, but the other reference is to a type of ownership.
Thank you for clarifying that for everybody. Any other questions from council or committee? At this time, I'd like a motion to approve 2022-71 and ask for a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 3-0. Next on the agenda is 2022-72, an ordinance authorizing the formation of a community improvement corporation as Ohio nonprofit corporation and furthering the mayor to file articles of incorporation declaring an emergency. Mr. Upton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2022-72, one of the tasks that your committee asked us to kind of chew on and come back with a recommendation was with respect to the composition of the board. And there were a couple of ideas and a couple of suggestions that council had made for us to entertain. And ultimately, in doing some peer research and in speaking with colleagues, the amended version in Section 5 of the ordinance that we are putting forward for your consideration this evening is that one member of the board be appointed by the president of council, subject to the approval of council. The appointee shall be a member of the general public not serving in any elected office within the city of North Olmsted. To your point, and to the question as to, whether sometimes members of council sit on boards, this would make it such that no member of council would sit on the board. Also, no member of the school board could sit on the board, because part of what the CIC may be doing at some point in time is talking about economic development incentives that may or may not include matters germane to what the school board would have to contemplate as well. So we thought that this was clean. I put it set in stone, so there's no ambiguity.
Thank you. And then just for clarification on the fourth member, the member appointed by the mayor, that one's open to being somebody from her administration or a resident?
Ideally, it would be whomever the mayor selects. I know that in the body of the next ordinance, I serve in a kind of a perfunctory role as the executive director, so it would not be myself, but it is the mayor's appointment, yes.
Any questions from committee? Questions from council? Mr. Glassman?
Thank you. At least what I'm seeing on Mr. Limpert's screen says the chair of the finance committee is on this. You say there are no members of council on this, which is it?
With respect to this particular appointment, the question that was raised in the committee meeting prior
Yeah.
was that would this second appointment that the president of council make, would he appoint another member of council? That was the question raised at the meeting. Mr. Chairman of the Finance Committee, you will still be on that board.
Yep.
Nice.
Oh, I'm not angling for it. I'm just.
Nice try in trying
Just
to-
wanted to verify whether the responsibility was coming or not.
No,
Thank you.
Yes, most definitely was.
Yep. Madam Mayor, did you have any comments, or?
Just that, as Director Upton indicated, we heard what the concerns of council were, and wanted to make sure that those were addressed before you this evening. And then also, to your point, Director Upton, that having another member of our community be a part of this board, we felt was important, and that council should have that authority to appoint them. So we hope that this amendment will address those concerns.
It does, and thank you. Well, it does for me. I'll let the rest of the council speak for themselves, but appreciate that clarification. I think it will be much more straightforward and one less thing to worry about when it's clearly articulated. Any other questions from council, committee? Okay, at this time, I'd like to make a motion to recommend 2022-72 and ask for a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 3-0, and I will conclude the Building Zone Development Committee meeting at 7:35 p.m.
Yep.
Mr. Chair,
Oh,
you have one more piece of legislation.
what did I miss?
73. the agreement with the city between.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought I was reading 73.
Nice try.
I will not close the meeting, it's still open at 7:25 PM. And on the agenda is 2022-73, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter an economic development agreement with the North Olmsted Community Improvement Corporation declaring an emergency. Mr. Upton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the last committee meeting, your committee raised a question with respect to item number 23, which is the last item in the agency agreement, which deals with the compensation of the executive director. At this point in time, we are asking council to amend that particular section to add the language after $1 and say, "and shall not be entitled to any additional benefits, including but not limited to fringe benefits, bonuses, or any other considerations." Again, just to clarify that that is cut and dry in black and white, so that there's no ambiguity moving forward.
Thank you.
And that's the only amendment
Yeah.
proposed at this time.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Any questions from council or committee? Okay, at this time, I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of ordinance 2022-73 as amended and ask for a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes 3-0. Clerk, did I say as amended for 2022-72? Mr. O'Malley, can I redo that as amended?
Yes.
So, just to revisit 2022-72, I'd like to make that motion for approval as amended and ask for a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 3-0. So just to recap, 2022-72 as amended, 3-0, and 2022-73 as amended, 3-0. And I'll conclude the Building Zone Development Committee meeting at 7:37 PM.
I'd like to call the Environmental Control Committee to order on September 13th, 2022 at 7:38. Present are committee members Scarl, Gilchrist, and Kelly, all of council, the mayor, assistant law director, finance director, HR director, economic development director, safety director, special assistant to the mayor, and guests. On the agenda is ordinance 2022-79, which is an ordinance amending section 941.01 entitled Classifications Established of Chapter 941 of the Streets, Utilities, and Public Services Code entitled Refuse Collection. Madam Mayor, who will be speaking tonight?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tonight, we're going to have Mr. Mazzarolo introduce the amendment that we're suggesting to council this evening. And you'll find that in the legislation under Section D, which essentially we're adding non-dedicated streets to this particular ordinance.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr.
Mr.
Mazzarello.
Chair, so the legislation is allowing the city to pick up on non-dedicated streets if they meet certain criteria, and as long as that community, whether that HOA or homeowners association or individual owners, are comfortable with it. I can't imagine that many would not be comfortable with it. Having the city pick up a portion of the amount. It does not mean that we will always pick up their trash, because there's, in working with this with law, there's concerns about equal protection clauses for this portion, since it would only be, at this point, we're only proposing a prorated amount as we kind of ease this into the budget. And then when we go back out to bid in the future, the idea would be to put the full amount in and then change the code in the future to allow it to permanently be picked up completely. And what, right now, the problem would be is if we did it now and we wanted to do a proration, there would be an equal protection clause, because some people would getting it paid in full, some people would not be. So that's why we cannot list it right now as just a dedicated, as non-dedicated streets. We have to kind of be a little careful in our verbiage to ensure that it's an option that those homeowners association and individual homes can have with the city. They can enter into agreement with us. The payments would go straight to Republic Services. We would not be people would not be paying us money. We would not be, refunding people's money. All of the money would be going to Republic Services, so their bills would be lowered. And this is a two-piece portion of legislation. This first piece of legislation gives the city the right to do this. We get council approval, and then we would, once we decide on what those rates would be, what we'd be paying in terms of rates, at that point, then we would come back with the second piece of legislation for approval of council to say that we are good to go on that portion of it. And then we can start picking up the portion of their fees on the non-dedicated streets.
Okay, thank you. My first question is, what is the plan of the administration on paying? How are you going to separate this out, the payments?
So.
I mean, is it going to take 4 years, going to take 3 years, 2 years?
So the mayor is wanting to wrap it up when we go out to bid the next time, so it'd be 100% at that point in time. Right now, the plan would be starting in January, it'd be 25% the city, 75% the residents, 50% the city the following year, 50% the residents. And then the question becomes when we go out to bid the next time, because there are 2 option years. If we continued on with those option years, it would be 75, 25, and then it would be 100%. And that last one, that would be the plan as of right now. If we did not go on with those option years, the plan would be to, when we go out to bid, to put the 100% in at that point in time.
When is the contract up, or when's the first
The
negotiation?
year 5 is in 2024. There are 2 option years, which are 2025 and 2026. Right now, if you look at what some of the other cities in the area have been doing, they're significantly more in contract price than what our option year 2 would be. Things can change over the course of time, so it would really just depend on whether we end up using those option years or go out to bid. That would be a decision of the mayor and council, what you guys would want to do at that point in time.
Okay. Approximately, and I know this may be a tough one to answer right now, how many residents on these non-dedicated streets are we talking about? Do we have a number for that yet, or?
I'm going a little bit on the high end right now and saying about 850. It's probably a little bit less than that, but I'm also trying to take into account if maybe we're missing a duplex here or something like that, so there might be 2 addresses instead of 1. So I'm going to go a little bit on the high end and say it'd be 850 at most.
And what is roughly per household? $25, $30?
Right
a
now,
month?
in 2022, the rate is $18.30 per household.
Okay.
And next year, which is when we were planning on doing this, the rate goes up to $18.94.
Okay.
So if we were to do, and again, the numbers can change. I mean, this is what we'd have to do with the second ordinance is determine what those numbers would be. But if we did 25% in 2023, the city would be paying about $48,297.
Okay. One more question.
Mhm.
This is a great program. I have relatives that live on those streets, and they've been complaining about paying for their own garbage when they pay high taxes to North Olmsted. So I think it's an excellent move by our administration and hopefully by council. I do have a point that I'd like to make. I know you want to try to do 25, 50, 75, 100. I'd like to see something done 50 and 50 if possible, to get this done with, get these residents where they get more money in their pocket sooner than later. I know it's a budget thing, but I think it's worth looking at to do 50 now and 50 in 1 year after that. So go ahead, Madam Mayor.
Mr. Chairman, absolutely, I understand where you're coming from, for sure. The reason that we were, when discussing this and trying to figure out the most responsible way to handle it, so that the impact on the city budget wouldn't be extreme, especially at this point, not knowing sort of, where things are headed economically. That's why we are suggesting 25, 50, 75, and then 100. But I completely understand where you are coming from and the residents' concerns as well, so.
Thank you. That's all I have at this time. How about committee members? No committee members? Councilwoman Heeman? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilman Gilchrist?
Yeah, I do have one question. Will they have the same, like, garbage cans like we have, and have the same, like, refuge pickups and things all fall under the same that the rest of the city has?
Correct. They currently can receive the same rate, and they have the same amount of cans, the same type of can for recycling and for refuge, and they would continue to use those cans and everything. We would just, what we do is Republic would, whatever the percentages we take off, Republic would bill them for, if it's 50/50, Republic would bill them a 50% of it, and then we would get billed the additional 50%.
Okay.
Thank you. Councilwoman Heeman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Ms.
What I'd like to point out is that developments that have been paying their own trash pay the same amount of property taxes as every other resident. But they don't even get fire hydrants painted. They get nothing, absolutely nothing. And I really think that 50% at first would be absorbable, really, and doable. One of the things that I think it's important to note is that those developments had to privately contract on their own with Republic or someone else. Republic doesn't come on a different garbage day. Republic doesn't do anything different. And I pushed several years ago very hard, and Republic actually rewrote the development's contract so that they were paying what the city rate was. They were actually overcharging a private development by $5,000 a month, even though they came on no other day. It was really a little crazy because that HOA bill backed down by $5,000 a month when they in fact were, then put in line with what the city's rate was. So just even that was a savings, but still, it wasn't like anyone was safeguarding what they were paying. And so I think that that's important to note, that now this will make it a little bit more equal, and for all the private streets to be able to have their contracts negotiated well and in their best interest. So thank you.
Thank you. Director Coffer?
Yes, Mr. Chair, with all due respect, I don't know that Councilwoman Heeman should be speaking on this, and maybe should be, I'm not sure, because she's on the board of her homeowners association that will derive a benefit from this. So I'm just trying to keep it on the, if
Mr. Chair, I won't be voting on it. If I'm allowed to have an opinion, then I'm
into any
happy to go to the.
discussions regarding it when you are recusing yourself because of a conflict.
This is only discussion, Finance Director.
It's
And I
a
think it was
committee
important to
meeting.
point out that they were being, all HOAs, not just one,
Well, I
were
know,
being
but
severely
I'm just trying
overcharged.
to
They were
protect the
overcharged,
process.
Director.
I'm, with no
Okay,
disrespect
excuse
to
me,
you,
but maybe
I'm trying to protect the
our
process.
Director of Law can, Assistant Director, let us know.
Typically, when a person is going to be recusing themselves, they don't participate at all. The most appropriate approach is to withdraw from the meeting altogether, so as not to use their position to influence the body. It's my understanding that Ms. Heeman may be a member of the Board of Directors for one of these associations, and it's likely acquired some of the information that she's sharing with council in that position. So it's not just at the time of the vote. In my experience, recusal means you're not participating at all.
I will remain silent, thank you.
Thank you for that clarification. Thank you, Ms. Heeman, for that. Councilman Limpert, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, I think all of these contracts started because they're not dedicated streets, and it was part of a development process that, because those weren't streets that were supported, they were charged for those services. If we are looking to add new streets or new will all those then fall within this contract of being, whether they're non-dedicated streets or dedicated streets, they'll immediately be covered by the city for all trash pickup?
Mr. Chairman, the classifications have not changed. And the only dividing line is the dedicated versus the non-dedicated streets. And the amendment is designed to enable the city to make arrangements with those neighborhoods and proceed deliberately within budget to start to provide those services and over the course of some period of time, be able to cover them all. Anticipating that the HOAs will be grateful for the opportunity to share that cost with the city instead of paying it all on their own, and eventually to have full coverage.
Madam Mayor? Oh, sorry.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just also wanted to clarify for council tonight, and appreciate the discussion as far as what the big picture of this will be, but that, that the amendment that's before you is just simply pointing out that we're adding non-dedicated streets, like we're folding that definition into this ordinance. So as far as talking about like numbers or percentages or, you know, of budgets and that type of thing, I just wanted to clarify that for the council members.
Thank you, Madam
Mr.
Mayor.
Chair.
Any other
Yeah,
questions?
just to follow up on that.
Yes,
So,
go ahead.
so,
Councilman Lippert.
any new development or new street that we would put in, we can automatically assume that that would add to the city's trash collection regardless of the type of street that gets put in.
Mr. Richard, that's correct. If we have a dedicated street, it would we'd be paying for them automatically. If it's a non-dedicated street, the city could enter into an agreement to pick up a portion of it as they move forward. So if there's a new street added, that's, if I'm understanding what your question is correct.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Gilchrist, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had I just want to make sure, would this start in 2023?
Yes, we were originally looking at having it start this year, but given the month that we're doing this, and then also when talking with, looking into some of the HOAs and things like that, some of them pay on a quarterly basis, some of them pay on a monthly basis, some of them pay on a yearly basis. And in order to be fair to everyone and trying to figure out, again, we're not looking to try to figure out who we need to refund money to, who we don't. It's just the cleanest way to do this would be to start January 1st.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other questions from council? Councilman Glassburn?
So this applies, if I'm understanding correctly, to condominiums that are 2 stories or less that put a trash can out on the street right now,
Correct.
but does not apply to, say, condominiums that a number of residents share a dumpster.
Correct.
And why is that why is that the line we chose?
I think part of the reason is just because we're trying to keep prices the same. So we're looking at people that the city's historically paid for trash collection from. Those, the places where they actually took the trash out to the road, whether it was dedicated or not dedicated, was originally what was done. And then when they pulled back, it was our understanding that that it was only the non-dedicated streets. The ones that have dumpsters have never been included in any of the pickup, and we're continuing that process at this time as there's different fees and different rates for those pickups.
Mr. Chair, I just would encourage us and the city as it discusses this forward, be very careful about how we talk about this, because residences of numerous condominium associations won't derive benefit from this and don't want to create expectations that are not going to be met.
Okay, thank you. Is there any other questions? Council?
Mr. Chair?
Oh, go ahead, Councilman Lippert.
Just as, I don't think I need it for voting, but just for awareness, it would be good to know then what streets are impacted by this definitional change, so we can better inform people when they ask for that very question.
I can provide that list.
Yeah.
Okay, we good? So as the mayor said, this ordinance is just to amend so we can move from dedicated to, and adding non-dedicated. And at the future, we're going to talk prices and new legislation or whatever. So at this time, I'd like to recommend ordinance 2022-79 to all of council and ask for a second.
Second.
Motion made by myself, seconded by Councilwoman Gilchrist. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. The motion passes 3-0 with no other items on the agenda. The Environmental Control Committee meeting will conclude at, I think that's 7:55. Thank you.
Finance Committee of Council will convene at 7:55 PM. Present are all of council, the mayor, assistant law director, and directors of finance, HR, economic development. I saw safety. She's hiding behind the special assistant to the mayor. First on the agenda is -80 concerning a contract with Squire Patton Boggs. Who would like to speak to this? Perhaps Mr. O'Malley?
Mr. Chair, I would speak to it. This is an ordinance asking council to authorize the law director to retain the services of special counsel to assist with the review of the TIF program and the expenditures that may be taken from the TIF program. I'm sorry, I thought there would be a copy of the retainer agreement attached, and I don't see it. Perhaps it was supplied to you, and I don't have a copy of it, no? My understanding is that they bill at the rate of $500 per hour, and this is not at all uncommon for this kind of specialized service. And certainly, we would be very cautious in the use of their time and be very precise with the questions that are presented.
Mr. Chair.
Law director, I'm sorry, finance director.
Ooh, I got a promotion.
I don't know that I think they're co-equal.
I wanted to mention that we have used Squires over the years for the development of the original TIF and changing it and our CRAs and everything. It is a specialized public finance type related, and you do need that expertise. It's not something that a lot of people, general attorneys, know about. And so we're very confident in utilizing them and have had much success in the past.
Thank you. Again, my theme of the evening of saying things as a layperson, this would be funded from the current TIF that we have right now in terms of any
Yes.
utilization? Okay. Are there any questions from finance? Councilwoman Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Director, is there a cap on the amount that we plan to spend?
Was there do you remember if there was an amount? I'm sorry, I think there was, but I didn't see the final one, so I will have to let you know on that.
Okay, and has their hourly rate even been discussed, perhaps? Maybe on a different rate? Perhaps a bit of a reduction, or could we get a cap put on this as far as funding? I just don't want to leave it open. I don't think that we have many open-ended contracts. I don't think I want to keep this one open either.
Councilwoman Williamson, the clerk sent us the contract, I don't know, a week or so ago on this. I would need a moment to bring it up on my phone too, because I don't want to misstate something. But perhaps we can stand at ease for a moment to see if make sure that was, or verify which portions of your question are addressed in the contract. While I am doing that, so I'm not holding anyone hostage here, are there other questions from council on this legislation?
Mr. Chair,
Madam Clerk?
the contract that was sent was for the Maloney contract, which is
Okay.
the next piece of legislation.
But not this
we-
one.
We did not
Okay.
receive anything for that.
My apologies
No,
for,
no, that's fine.
it's been a
We have a
minute since
letter.
we got that.
We received a letter.
Right.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Ms. Heeman.
thank you. I would think that there is not a contract for this. Typically, law firms, will offer engagement letters that outline their scope of services, the dollar amount, hourly rate of, paralegal, junior associate, senior associate, partner, et cetera. And there isn't typically a cap or anything put on those types of services because the service is not provided by the firm unless we ask for it. So we are actually in control of what we're spending when we ask for the work to be done.
But council is
So
not.
that, I don't know if that it helps anyone, but it's a little, they only do what we ask versus, they're
Thank you for
telling
the
us.
clarification, Ms. Heeman. I'm hearing Councilwoman Williamson's concern, though, is that would
Sure.
remain in the bailiwick of the administration or those who are dealing directly with the squire in this case.
Correct. We have no control over who's calling, making, questions or adjustments to anything.
So,
I would like to see us, even if it was a six-figure cap, I would like to see a cap somewhere, just to kind of keep, look, I don't know how much.
That
these-
sounds reasonable, and
don't-
I certainly wouldn't oppose that. And I would submit a $20,000 cap if it tends to be more than that. I don't think the scope of services is necessarily as well-defined as in some of the contracts that you see. The Director of Economic Development is going to require specialized consultation with the law director and with the special counsel to iron out exactly what the proposals may be for the TIF expenditures. And if 20,000 is insufficient, the administration could come back to petition council for more. Does that sound fair and reasonable? You don't know? Okay.
I mean, I think that, I like the six-figure amount better if, because you don't know what's coming up and, there may be some, like when we're setting up the CIC and the TIF and dealing with these negotiations and additional things, so it varies. I know that we spend, on an annual basis, we spend monies with Squires to do our annual information filing and our bond notes and things like that, and it's probably collectively, it's probably over 30,000 on a normal year, so that's where I'm just, I don't wanna have to keep coming back to council, for something that, the law director will control, because,
That's right.
he does control that contract, because he's the one hiring them.
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Heeman.
Thank you. With all due respect, Ms. Williamson has worked in the legal field for her entire career, and I think she understands that, you pay for what, you get what you pay for, and that there are only a few law firms in the city who are actually qualified to do this work, so it's not like you go to just anyone, and that the law director is in fact in control of the work, the requests, and the spending. And so if you're questioning whether or not the law director has the ability to, proceed in an economical fashion with our work, well, I would think that perhaps then we've been doing this all wrong for 100 years or so. I think that they're a reputable law firm that
Okay.
is
I'm not
an
gonna
average
get into
rate.
this debate.
I just,
Mr. Chair, if you could please.
I'm sorry, I have
Cut
the
it
floor,
down.
Ms. Williamson, until
So
someone
I'm
takes it away
going
from
to-
me.
I'm going to cease this
Well, thank you,
element of
Mr.
this
Chair, but I
for
think that
now.
it's insulting almost that we're considering telling the law director when we want a major program that will provide funding for us that, we're going to tell him, to be cheap about it. and to not get us the best work product.
Thank you, Ms. Heeman. This item is on consideration for suspended, or passing on second reading, or there's a request to do so. So can anyone from the administration speak as to the timing considerations and why that request was made? Because that might influence how we proceed in this committee.
Yes. Director Upton, please.
Mr. Chair, I can't speak to the suspension request. I know that the law director submitted this item and asked the mayor to request suspension. I will say that the particular TIF that we're contemplating in the project that's kind of in the near term is, in my estimation, the developer and architect have not even begun the submittal and plan review process at this point in time. So if it be the pleasure to study a little bit further, I could say with reasonable confidence that I have not even been approached for a pre-application meeting relative to the subject parcels and the subject development that is kind of forward-looking in this engagement. So if a pause is needed, it's not the end-all be-all is what I'm trying to say. I think there's a little bit of a runway. We'd still like to have the emergency clause so that when we sort this thing out, we can enter into the agreement right away. But I see that this development proposal is not at my desk yet. And I haven't had contact with the architect in a couple of weeks. So that's what I would say to that.
Thank you, Director Upton. Mr. O'Malley, can you tell us anything about the timeline of this request from the law department?
The urgency and
Yes.
the request for an emergency clause?
Yes.
No, I cannot.
Okay. Are there further questions or comments from council?
No. I don't see why we can't hold this, and we can always schedule a meeting for next week. It should be an easy thing to clear up.
Mr. Chair,
Director Kopfer.
we could get more information for you by next Tuesday before the meeting, if you want to schedule
Sure.
a committee
Is it-
meeting, and then we can have that.
Is the, maybe this is another question, are the requests on the suspension and passage this evening, if I was understanding this correctly, of 80 and 81, are those interrelated?
No, Mr.
No.
Chair.
Okay. I didn't think so, but I just, coming from the same place, making sure. Okay.
Second reading.
It will be after.
Yes.
Mr. Chair, let me ask this. So,
Yes, Mr.
Ms.
Limper.
Williamson, I mean, you're just looking for a cap that's reasonable, right?
It was
So-
a suggestion. We have caps on all of our other contracts. I don't understand why this would be any different. And we're not saying $10,000. I'm just asking that we put something on it. If that's not the pleasure of the remainder of council, that's fine. But, I'm voicing my concerns. Doesn't have to be a jab contest around here, but that's all I'm asking for.
I understand.
Thank you.
Councilwoman. I don't want to drag this out indefinitely this evening. If we could take sanities for perhaps 2 minutes and give the law director a call to see if he would answer for one of us, and so we can better understand the urgency of this matter, because I assume there's a reason why this needs to be on the agenda tonight. So.
Can we move on to the next item while we're waiting?
Well, that's a great suggestion. So, we'll leave item 80 sitting for the moment. Let's discuss 2022-81 while we're trying to reach the law director to find out more information about the urgency of 80. I don't wish to distract Mr. O'Malley at this time. Could someone else speak to 81?
I can-
Mr. O'Malley.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Do you want me to text for you?
I sent him a text. I don't know if he's airborne or if he's going to be able to respond to a text.
Yeah.
81 is a request for authorization to enter into a contract with Michael Maloney, who is special counsel to assist with an investigation that's underway by BCI. They are investigating a use of force. The shooting that took place following an armed robbery recently in the news at the Starbucks. So it's fairly customary for an investigation like this to occur in anticipation of an accusation of excessive force. He's got some specialization in this area. It includes advising and representing this matter as it may proceed through essentially a criminal review. It's my understanding that the estimate for this work is in the vicinity of between $8,000 and $12,000 to see it through from beginning to end, which includes, likely includes a presentation to the grand jury. I regret to inform you that this legislation also does not have an exhibit attached to it, but I think that Ms. Heeman well described how attorneys typically have a retainer agreement that quotes a rate. Mr. Maloney's rate is not as high as Squire's rate. It would certainly be lower. And unlike Squire's, he has indicated at least a ballpark of what it would likely cost for the services in the range of $8,000 to $12,000.
Okay, are there questions from committee?
Mr. Chair?
I'm sorry.
This is exactly the kind of contract I like to see. We have a ballpark of where our money is going. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments from committee? From council, I'll do Ms. Heeman first, then Mr. Kelly. Ms. Heeman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to point out that this is a criminal matter rather than, a corporate type matter. So they are able to give better estimates because there are, trial hours and that sort of thing that are sort of predetermined and evidence. So I would think that that is in an appropriate range that we are being, offered at the $8,000 to $10,000 or $12,000.
Thank you, Ms. Heeman. Mr. Kelly?
One question for the Assistant Law Director. That $8,000 to $12,000 range that you're talking about, does that figuring a hourly rate into that and the approximate number of hours that he feels this might go through?
Yes.
What would that hourly rate be?
I don't know the answer to that question, but it's not a flat fee for service. It's his anticipated hours at his hourly rate.
Okay. I spoke to Mr. Maloney today, and he told me some of his experience he's had doing what we would be hiring him for, and I'm very comfortable going forward with this.
Are there further comments or questions from council? Ms. Gilchrist and then Director
Thank you.
Kopfer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yep.
We went over that $12,000. If he needed more time to work on this case, do you know how much it would cost hourly? Or would we come back to council for more?
While we find that answer.
If we had a cap at 15, I think it would cover it, and we would not exceed the cap without coming back to council.
Okay.
If he ran into something unanticipated, and I think as Mr. Kelly has learned, some of his prediction is based upon how these things have been handled by his office in the past, his experience with doing these kinds of reviews. So he has a good idea of how much time will be involved to take us through the process.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Director
Mr. Chair,
Kopfer?
I just wanted to mention that the law director had mentioned before that, we would have to do a budget amendment, for his outside services, to add this to it, because that wasn't anticipated at the time of the budget. And we're gonna be doing a transfer ordinance, at the next meeting, so we'll make sure that that's included in it.
Director Kopfer, that was on my mind when we were discussing these amounts, because it sounded about to be.
Finance.
To be the entirety of the outside services line.
Right.
Or possibly exceeding it. Okay. Are there any further comments or questions from council on this? Mr. O'Malley, if we were to put that not to exceed limitation onto this, would I offer that as an amendment, or?
Yes, I would recommend that.
Okay. Can I get an informal look from folks? Is 15,000 an acceptable number as a not to exceed?
Yes.
Okay. All right, in that case, I will move to favorably recommend 2022-81 with the amendment of not to exceed 15,000 and ask for a second.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Limpert. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ms. Williamson, did I hear you?
Aye.
Aye?
Yes.
Okay. That is 3-0 as amended. Okay, and that will be on the agenda for this evening. Do we have an update on our outreach to law director on -80? Not yet?
He's indicated that if the director is not in a big rush to have this passed immediately, that he's fine with that. So if you wanted to hold it, I think the finance director makes a good suggestion in order to provide more information on what a potential cap, a realistic cap may be. And I do sincerely doubt that we're going to be successful in negotiating a lower rate than they proposed. But perhaps they can do what Mr. Maloney has done and give us a ballpark on the total.
Okay, so in that case, it would be my intention to hold 80 until for a finance committee before council next week. And so I would move to hold 80 in committee and ask for a second.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Limpert. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that is held 3-0 in committee. And I will be not participating in the matters concerning -77 and -78. So I will defer now to Vice Chair
Thank
Limpert
you.
for those two matters.
Thank you, Mr. Glassburn. Please note that the chairman has left the meeting. I will continue the meeting as vice chair. On the agenda, 2022-77, an ordinance providing for the issuance of sale of not to exceed $1,825,000 of notes in anticipation of the issuance of bonds to provide funds to pay costs of acquiring real estate for city purposes. Ms. Kopfer?
Yes, and Mr. Chair, can I ask you to talk a little louder? I'm sorry,
I can, yeah.
Oh, thank you, I'm just,
I'll bring this closer and
oh,
I'll
that's
make
good,
it
yeah.
louder, right?
And maybe that mustache is holding your
megaphone,
lip
but-
down and you're not talking
Could be.
enough.
Well, Mr. Kelly, you want to come to his defense, don't you?
Go ahead, Ms. Copper.
Anyway, the first issue is to purchase Spruce School. And we're doing, this is the same type of bond anticipation note we always do. It's a tax exempt note. It's a general obligation note, meaning that any dollars, tax or otherwise, can be utilized to pay down this note. Our intent is that because part of it is for stormwater, part of it's for sanitary, part of it's for recreation, that we may be able to have a combination of resources available for repayment of this debt. We'll know more as we develop the plan for that land and move forward on it. So it's good that we're doing it for a one-year bond anticipation note. Currently, tax exempt comparables that have been in the market lately are at a 3 or a 3.1% interest rate. Obviously a lot higher than what we've been used to in the past since the Fed has started their interest rate raising. But this is still a very cost-effective way to make sure that we buy the property in time for the schools needing it, and that we can start our plan, and then we'll determine a long-term strategy for financing either a bond or some other method, so.
Okay. Let's just go into 78 really quick before we vote on
Okay.
anything, so we can understand
That
the
really long,
differences.
do you have to read all that?
I'm gonna read it real quick. An ordinance authorizing the issuance of sale of not to exceed $2.18 million economic development revenue notes of the city under Section 13, Article 8 of the Ohio Constitution, the Chapter 165 Ohio Revised Code, pay cost of a project that defines 165.01 in Ohio Revised Code for the purpose of creating and preserving jobs and employment opportunities, and improving economic welfare of city residents, the state of Ohio providing pledge for the purpose of certain non-tax revenues, establish certain funds of the city, and approving related documents.
You did read that very nicely, quickly. Now, this is a taxable note, bond anticipation note. We can only utilize non-tax revenues for repayment purposes. So you'll see in there non-tax revenue pledge type thing, which, that's any charges for services, any fines, permit fees, anything other than property tax and income tax, or, for example, sewer revenue charges, because those are designated for a specific purpose in another fund. And also any of the state highway monies in the street maintenance fund, the gas tax, we're not allowed to utilize those for repayment purposes. But we have plenty of resources, and my intent is that the first resource we're going to use is once we determine and have a good plan for that land and we sell it to a developer, that the largest amount of repayment will come from whoever purchases the property for development. And so that is the ultimate non-tax revenue plan that we have. These taxable notes, their rates are 3.65 to 3.85 currently in the market. They're a little higher, but not a lot higher. And we have to do it this way. Our bond counsel recommended it, and because we don't intend to hold the land and utilize the land for a public purpose, we are planning on coming up with a plan and moving it and getting a developer in there. So we've already passed legislation to analyze what's the best use for that property. So it is in our best interest to do taxable notes at this time. And this is my 25th year, and this is the first taxable note I've had to do. So I'm learning something new this year.
Any questions from, I wanted those both read so we understood the difference between the two bond notes and the way that we're going to repay those. Any questions from committee on that?
No.
Questions from council? Go ahead, Mr. Kelly.
So is this the $4 million that we voted on?
Yes, yes.
Okay, it's not addition to.
No.
No, correct. This is just the financing portion to pay for that purchase.
Got it, thank you.
Mhm.
Good question, though, just for clarity. Any other questions from council? Ms. Heeman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just really have one question. All of these documents were drafted by Squire Patton Boggs as of
Yes.
8/31. Was there a cap on the legal fees to draft all of this bond work? Just asking. Or do we just trust them to do our work? Was there a cap, yes or no?
No, I do
Thank
not
you.
believe so. It's
Thank
to
you.
get the job done.
Right. thanks.
However, I do want to mention that the fees are paid for out of the premiums that are issued, so you issue the debt to cover the costs as well. So, but it's still a cost to the city.
And if I may, one more, but we don't know what those are until they're purchased and we know what the rates are. So we really, yeah.
Yeah, we have
Just to be
some
clear about how the
estimates,
legal
but-
fees work, because that's been a question this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Kopfer.
And do you want to, like, just so you know, the reason why it's not 2 million and 2 million, we split it by the property,
Acreage.
not the value, but
Size,
the square footage.
yeah,
So-
acreage. Thank you. Okay, any other questions from council or committee?
I have a question.
Ms. Gilchrist, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The interest rate that's on these, is that subject to variations?
Yes, that's why, thank you, that's a good question. The rates that I'm quoting you are what's going on in the market right now when other municipalities and governments are selling bond anticipation notes, so.
Thank you.
Mhm. It could change based on when we go to sell it in November
Okay.
or October.
No
Thank you.
further questions. I'd like to make a motion to recommend ordinance 2022-77. Ask for a second.
A second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 2-0. At this time, I'd like a motion to recommend for approval, ordinance 2022-78. Ask for a second.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes 2-0. And with nothing else on the agenda for finance, I'll conclude the finance committee at 8:28 PM.
Take a couple minute break.
The caucus meeting of September 13th, 2022 will now please come to order at 8:35 PM. Present are all of council, the mayor, assistant law director, finance director, HR director, economic director, safety director, special assistant to the mayor, and guests. If there are no additions or corrections, the caucus meeting minutes of September 6, 2022 are approved as written. There is one item being requested for suspension this evening, and that is Resolution 2022-81, which is on second reading. Mayor Jones, would you like to speak to this?
Thank you, Mr. President. As council just reviewed in the committee meeting, this legislation allows the Director of Law to enter into an agreement with an attorney to serve as special counsel in a deadly force investigation, which is going to be happening very soon. And so we would respectfully ask council to consider this matter under suspension.
Thank you, Mayor. Does anyone, are there any objections from council to suspension? Seeing none, hearing none. Does anyone on council have anything else they wish to bring up this evening? Our clerk of council reminded me that we also need to schedule a finance committee meeting prior to our next council meeting next week on the 20th. So Councilman Glassburn, would you like to schedule finance for, I don't want to dictate, but
7:40 would be lovely. If
Beautiful.
caucus is at 7:45.
like minds think alike.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Does anyone else on council have anything else they wish to bring up this evening? Anything from the administration?
No, Mr. President.
Thank you. Seeing nothing else, the caucus meeting of September 13th, 2022 is adjourned at 8:37 PM. The special council meeting of September 13th, 2022 will now please come to order at 8:38 PM. The audience is invited to join council in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Broussard,
Present.
Ms. Gilchrist,
Here.
Mr. Glassman,
Here.
Ms. Heeman,
Here.
Mr. Kelly,
Here.
Mr. Limpert,
Present.
Mr. Scarl,
Present.
Ms. Williamson.
Here.
If there are no additions or corrections, the council meeting minutes of September 6, 2022 are approved as written. The following legislation is considered for suspension of the rules this evening on second reading, Resolution 2022-81. Moving into council committee reports, Councilwoman Williamson, as President Pro Tem of the Committee of the Whole on August 9th, 2022, do you have a report this evening?
I do, Mr. President, thank you. The Committee of the Whole meeting, Committee of the Whole met on August 9, 2022 at 7:54 PM. Present were all members of council and all members of the administration. On the agenda was the second tranche of the ARPA funding. The meeting, council previously approved the first tranche, which totaled $1.6 million earlier in the year. The administration was proposing the following spending under public safety, which includes the Lorraine Road emergency vehicle signal preemption, dynamic speed feedback signs, speed humps, and demolition and reposition of Forest Elementary School property. The third item was under preserving community assets and spending to upgrade Wi-Fi and install security cameras and panic buttons at the rec center, security cameras and panic buttons at Springdale, and to match $150,000 in state capital funding for updates to North Olmsted Park. Another part of the discussion was the pavement condition rating system will leverage sensor technology, 3D cameras, and data analytics to create and maintain a 5-year capital improvement strategy. If council approves the funding in the second tranche, the total ARPA funding will be over $3.2 million with the city, bring approximately $1.1 million into public safety, $1 million into maintaining neighborhoods and community assets, and $747,000 into improving city services, and $320,000 into economic development. In addition to the mayor's presentation, Director of Economic and Community Development Upton and Director of Recreation and Public Engagement Penchak presented to council what the administration has submitted to the county for ARPA funding. Director Upton discussed the request for $892,000 for demolition of Spruce Elementary and installation of stormwater management infrastructure, while Director Penchak discussed the city's plan requesting $275,000 to the county to help with the installation of indoor field turf and walking track. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to come right back to you, Councilwoman Williamson, Chairwoman of the Public Safety, Health, and Welfare Committee. Do you have a report?
No, I do not, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Limpert, Chairman of the Building, Zoning, and Development Committee. Do you have a report?
I do, Mr. President, thank you. Building, Zoning, and Development Committee met this evening, 9/13/2022, at 7:05 p.m. Present were committee members Limpert, Williamson, Heeman. The rest of council, the mayor, the law director, the HR director, the economic director, safety director, and guests. On the agendas were 2022-68, Resolution 2022- Ordinance 2022-71, Ordinance 2022-72, and Ordinance 2022-73. Discussed 2020-68, which was amended to include nonprofit organizations present in storefront in Appendix A, and that the application must create one job per 10,000 in grant funding awarded, which was clarified in Appendix A and C. And that motion was approved by a vote of 3-0. That motion to amend was approved by a vote of 3-0. Next was Ordinance 2022-71, which was ordinance amending the definition of apartments in Section 1115.02 of the Planning and Zoning Code of the Codified Ordinances of the City of North Olmsted, entitled Definition A, B, for the purpose of updating definitions associated with multiple residence district uses. This clarified to kind of encompass townhomes and apartment under the same definition, and enable development of additional apartment types that are known to be desirable in the current market. After discussion, that vote was approved by a vote of 3-0. Next on the agenda was Ordinance 2022-72, and in that was a discussion to amend an ordinance authorizing the formation of a Community Improvement Corporation of Ohio nonprofit corporation and furthering the mayor to file articles of incorporation declaring emergency. The desired amendment there was to adjust the, based on council's feedback, to clarify the member appointed by council to be a resident who does not hold an elected position, and that amendment was approved. The whole ordinance was approved with amendment by a vote of 3-0 in committee. Next was Ordinance 2022-73, ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter an economic development agency agreement with the City of North Olmsted Improvement Corporation, and that was further an amendment in that to clarify the allowable salary of the director to not only be $1 but no other types of compensation, and that ordinance with amendment was recommended for approval by a vote to 3-0, and the committee concluded at 7:38 p.m. Mr. President?
Councilman.
At this time, I'd like to make several motions to amend legislation here. I'd like to make a motion to amend 2022-68 as discussed in committee, and ask for a second.
Second.
Motion to amend exhibit by substitution of Ordinance 2022-68 made by Councilman Limpert and seconded by Councilwoman Williamson. Roll call, please.
Mr. Lippert?
Yes.
Ms. Williamson?
Yes.
Mr. Scarrow?
Yes.
Ms. Gilchrist?
Yes.
Ms. Heeman?
Yes.
Mr. Glassberg?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Motion to amend exhibit by substitution of Ordinance 2022-68 passes by a vote of 7-0.
Mr. President, at this time, I'd like to make a motion to amend Ordinance 2022-71, or 72, thank you. in order to amend it to clarify that the city resident appointment will be a resident, not an elected official. Ask for a second.
Second, Mr. Chair, could you talk in like,
Yeah.
I can barely hear you.
Okay. Yeah, got a little bit of a soft throat today.
Second.
Thank you. Motion to amend ordinance 2022-72 made by Councilman Lippert, seconded by Councilwoman Williamson. Roll call, please.
Mr. Lippert?
Yes.
Ms. Williamson?
Yes.
Ms. Gilchrist?
Yes.
Ms. Heeman?
Yes.
Mr. Glassberg?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Scarl?
Yes.
Motion to amend ordinance 2022-72 passes by a vote of 7-0.
And Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to amend 2022-73 to clarify the salary allotment for the director position as noted, and ask for a second.
Second.
Motion to amend ordinance 2022-73 made by Councilman Lippert and seconded by Councilwoman Williamson. Roll call, please.
Mr. Lippert?
Yes.
Ms. Williamson?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. Heeman?
Yes.
Ms. Gilchrist?
Yes.
Mr. Glassberg?
Yes.
Mr. Scarl?
Yes.
Motion to amend ordinance 2022-73 passes by a vote of 7-0.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilwoman Heeman, Chairwoman of the Recreation, Public Parks, and Buildings Committee, do you have a report?
I do not, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Glassman, Chairman of the Finance Committee, do you have a report?
Yes, I do, Mr. President. The Finance Committee of Council met in council chambers this evening, September 13th, starting at 7:35 p.m. and ending when Mr. Lippert says so. Present were all of council and the mayor and directors of finance, HR, economic development, safety, and special assistant to the mayor, as well as Assistant Law Director O'Malley, filling in for the Director of Law. First for consideration was 2022-80 concerning a contract with Squire Patton Boggs. There was discussion about the rate and whether there would be any kind of not to exceed or cap for reauthorization by council. The item will be funded by TIF and will secure us specialized legal services for modifying our TIF. That item was held 3-0 in committee and will be subject to committee next week. Second item under consideration was -81 concerning a contract with attorney Michael P. Maloney to do an agreement with the city of North Olmsted to serve as a special counsel in matters regarding to law enforcement use of deadly force. This item was discussed in terms of there will be a following budget transfer ordinance to fund this, as this is not aligned currently with the budget of the that is outlined for outside services. And council, or the committee sought a $15,000 not to exceed limit on this agreement. So at this time, I would move to amend 2022-81 and ask for a second.
Second.
Motion to amend 2022-81 made by Councilman Glassburn and seconded by Councilman Lippert. Roll call, please.
Mr. Glassberg?
Yes.
Mr. Lippert?
Yes.
Ms. Williamson?
Yes.
Mr. Scarl?
Yes.
Ms. Gilchrist?
Yes.
Ms. Heeman?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Motion to amend 2022-81 passes by a vote of 7-0.
Also at this time, I would move to remove 2022-80 from the agenda and ask for a second.
Second.
Motion to remove 2022-80 from the agenda made by Councilman Glassburn and seconded by Councilman Lippert. Roll call, please.
Mr. Glassberg?
Yes.
Mr. Lippert?
Yes.
Mr. Kelly?
Yes.
Ms. Gilchrist?
Yes.
Ms. Williamson?
Yes.
Mr. Scarl?
Yes.
Ms. Heeman?
Yes.
Motion to remove 2022-80 from the agenda passes by a vote of 7-0.
And I'll ask for a moment of personal privilege after Mr. Lippert finishes the committee
Sure. So, at that time, Mr. Glassburn recused himself, and we, led the discussion, I led the discussion on ordinance 22-77, an ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of not to exceed $1,825,000 in notes, in anticipation of the issuance of bonds to provide funds to pay for costs acquiring real estate and city purposes. This was for the purpose of purchasing Spruce School, and it was discussed that these are going to be non-taxable notes. And after a little discussion, explanation of why we went that route, and the expected rate, tax exempt notes. Anticipated rate anywhere from 3% to 3.1 at the current market. That will be determined of when it actually closes. And after discussion, that was approved by a vote of 2-0. Next on the agenda was ordinance 2022-78, which is ordinance authorizing the issuance of sale of not to exceed $2.18 million of economic development revenue notes. And that is a different approach to the notes. That would be for the purchase of Forest School, and these would be taxable using non-tax revenue for a payment. And those rates would be anywhere at current market, 3.65, 3.85 at the current rate. And discussed on there why we went that route was for the anticipation of looking to sell that property, which would mean this route was recommended by bond counsel as the preferred option. And with that discussion, the vote was approved 2-0 to recommend. And I believe the meeting concluded at that point at 8:38 p.m. Mr. President, this concludes our report.
Mr. President, ask for a moment.
By all means.
Thank you. In Ward 2, there is a development consisting of the main through street of Fairlawn, but also the entrances off of Delmere and Woodmere. That development had a series of power outages, and First Energy will be making a major equipment replacement this Thursday that will result in a power outage from 8:30 in the morning until 2:30 in the afternoon. While that is a major inconvenience for some of those folks, we're very glad to see First Energy finally making the replacement that needs to happen so that this ceases to continue happening. And I thank you very much for the moment.
Thank you, and maybe just a quick question or comment for the administration. Would the text alert system maybe be a good idea to?
I'm sorry, Mr. President, I could not hear what you just said.
Would the text alert system be a good idea to let those residents know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
We will make sure that we not only utilize the text system, but also any other types of communications that we can have with residents at that time. Make sure to
All
do
right,
that.
thank you. Councilman Kelly, Chairman of the Streets and Transportation Committee, do you have a report?
No report. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Councilman Scarl, Chairman of the Environmental Control Committee, do you have a report?
I do, Mr. President, thank you. The Environmental Control Committee met this evening at 7:38. Present were all of council, council president, the mayor, assistant law director, finance director, HR director, economic development director, safety director, special assistant to the mayor, and guests. On the agenda was ordinance 2022-79, which is amending section 941.01 entitled Classifications Established of Chapter 941 of the Streets, Utilities, and Public Services Code entitled Refuse Collection. Numerous discussions were held. This was just to amend 941 to add non-dedicated streets to our already dedicated streets for refuse collection. And my meeting concluded at 7:55. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilwoman Gilchrist, Chairwoman of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee, do you have a report?
I do not, Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you. Are there any letters or communications to come before council at this time?
No, Mr. President.
Thank you. Audience participation, thank you for attending tonight's council meeting. Those attending city council meetings should show the same respect to others that they wish to have shown to them. If there's anyone in the audience who would like to address council, please come to the podium, state and spell your name and address for the clerk. If you live in a city other than North Olmsted, please state the name of that city and proceed with your comments. You will have up to 5 minutes.
Jim Burns, 3978 Dover Center. As has become a little bit apparent tonight, you need to speak up or move closer to your microphones. Us out here in the audience, we can't hear a thing that some of you people are saying. And even the mayor and the directors at the table can't hear what you're saying. So we need you to either speak up or move closer to the mic so we can hear what you're saying.
Thank you, Mr. Burns. And this is the first time I've ever been told that I'm not loud enough. For the record. Seeing no other comments from the audience, we will now move into legislation.
Legislation on second reading. Ordinance 2022-68, an ordinance establishing the quote, fix our fronts, end quote, storefront renovation grant program, and further authorizing the mayor to issue grants to approved grantees and declaring an emergency as amended. Ordinance 2022-71, an ordinance amending the definition of quote, apartment, end quote, in section 1115.02 of the Planning and Zoning Code of the Codified Ordinances of the City of North Olmsted entitled Definitions A through B for the purpose of updating definitions associated with multiple resident district uses. Ordinance 2022-72, an ordinance authorizing the formation of a community improvement corporation as an Ohio nonprofit corporation and furthering the mayor to file articles of incorporation and declaring an emergency as amended. Ordinance 2022-73, an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into an economic development agency agreement with the North Olmsted Community Improvement Corporation and declaring an emergency as amended. Ordinance 2022-77, an ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of not to exceed $1,825,000 of notes in anticipation of the issuance of bonds to provide funds to pay costs of acquiring real estate for city purposes.
Mr. President,
Councilman,
I am in possession of the fiscal certificate,
thank you.
fiscal officer's certificate.
Ordinance 2022-78, an ordinance authorizing the issuance and sale of not to exceed $2,180,000 economic development revenue notes of the city under Section 13, Article 8 of the Ohio Constitution and Chapter 165 of the Ohio Revised Code to pay costs of a quote project, end quote, as defined in Section 165.01 of the Ohio Revised Code for the purpose of creating and preserving jobs and employment opportunities and improving the economic welfare of the city and its residents and the state of Ohio, providing for the pledge for that purpose of certain non-tax revenues, establishing certain funds of the city and approving related documents. Ordinance 2022-79, an ordinance amending section 941.01 entitled quote classifications established end quote of chapter 941 of the Streets, Utilities, and Public Services Code entitled quote refuse collection end quote. Resolution 2022-81, a resolution authorizing the Director of Law on behalf of the City of North Olmsted to enter into an agreement with Attorney Michael P. Maloney to serve as special counsel in matters related to a law enforcement use of deadly force investigation and declaring an emergency as amended.
Mr. President, at this time, I would move to suspend the rule requiring 3 readings of this legislation. The matter was heard in committee this evening, and entering into this contract in an expedient fashion is in the public welfare, and I ask for a second.
Second.
Motion to suspend the rules requiring 3 readings for Resolution 2022-81 is made by Councilman Glassburn and seconded by Councilman Limpert. Roll call, please.
Mr. Glassberg,
Yes.
Mr. Limpert,
Yes.
Mr. Scarrow,
Yes.
Ms. Heeman,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Ms. Gilchrist,
Yes.
Ms. Williamson,
Yes.
That motion passes by a vote of 7-0. If there is anyone in the audience who wishes to address council regarding Resolution 2022-81, please approach the podium now.
Seeing none, Mr. President. Seeing none, Mr. President. I move to adopt 2022-81 and ask for a second.
Second.
Motion to adopt Resolution 2022-81 is made by Councilman Glassburn and seconded by Councilman Limpert. Roll call, please.
Mr. Glassberg,
Yes.
Mr. Lippert,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly,
Yes.
Ms. Gilchrist,
Yes.
Ms. Heeman,
Yes.
Ms. Williamson,
Yes.
Mr. Scarrow.
Yes.
Resolution 2022-81 is adopted by a vote of 7-0. Moving into scheduling committee meetings for Tuesday, September 20th, 2022. Councilman Glassburn.
Thank you, Mr. President. Finance Committee would seek to meet at 7:40 PM on the 20th to consider 2022-80 and request that a representative of the Law Department and the Economic Development Department be available to answer the issues raised this evening.
Thank you. With the agenda being completed and there being no further business to come before council, this special council meeting of September 13th, 2022 is adjourned at 9:02 PM.
Test. 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 I mean, I was talking soft, but that was low.
Dwayne, you fall out.
Test, test. Yeah. Test.
Does anybody know?
Hey, Chuck. Chuck, you have a sec?
I can hear everybody.
Is this
Dwayne, you fall out a lot.
Yeah, well, because I was staring down at my table, like, things I was trying to read from.
Morning.